The frost clung to the ancient pines like a shroud, their branches whispering secrets to the relentless wind that howled through the whispering woods. Moonlight filtered through the canopy in silver shards, casting long shadows that danced like restless spirits across the frozen earth. Elara huddled against the rough bark of a colossal oak, her breath fogging the air in shallow bursts. The cold seeped into her bones, a familiar ache that mirrored the emptiness in her chest. She had been wandering these forsaken trails for days, weeks perhaps, since the raiders burned her village to ash on the edge of the realm. The kingdom of Eldrath was crumbling, its lords too busy carving up the ruins to notice the survivors fleeing into the wilds. Her cloak, tattered and thin, offered little shield against the bite of the night. Elara's fingers, numb and cracked, fumbled with the last remnants of her fire, a few twigs snapped from low branches, now reduced to glowing embers that sputtered and died under the damp. She cursed softly, her voice lost in the gale, and pulled her knees tighter to her body. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but it was the loneliness that clawed deepest. In the village, she had been the weaver's daughter, her hands skilled at turning wool into warmth, her laughter a thread binding the community. Now she was adrift, a ghost in a world that had forgotten mercy. The woods seemed alive tonight more than usual. More, Elara had heard the tales since childhood, stories of the old blood that coursed through the land, awakening beasts and binding souls in ways no mortal could unravel. The elders spoke of wolves that weren't mere animals, but guardians of forgotten pacts, their eyes holding the wisdom of stars long fallen. She had dismissed them as comforts for the fearful, but out here, with the darkness pressing close, doubt crept in like the mist rolling from the nearby ravine. A low growl rumbled through the underbrush, freezing her blood. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs as she scanned the gloom. Yellow eyes gleamed from the shadows, unblinking, fixed on her form. Not one pair, but two. No, a single wolf, large and gaunt, its fur matted with burrs and the scent of distant rivers. It limped forward, favoring a hind leg, wounded by some hunter's trap or thorned snare. The beast's breath steamed in the cold, and up close, Elara saw the ribs pressing against its sides, the desperation in its gaze mirroring her own. She should have run. The smart thing would have been to scramble up the tree, to shout into the void until the creature slunk away. But fear twisted into something softer in her gut. Pity, perhaps, or the raw echo of her losses. The wolf paused a few paces away, its ears flattening, not in threat, but in wary submission. It whined, a sound that pierced the night like a child's cry, and collapsed onto the snow-dusted ground, panting. Elara's hand trembled as she reached into her satchel, pulling out the last scrap of dried meat she'd scavenged from a forgotten outpost. "Here," she murmured, her voice barely above the wind. She tossed it gently, watching as the wolf snapped it up with a grateful huff. Emboldened, or perhaps foolish, she inched closer, her boots crunching softly on the frost. The animal didn't flee. Instead, it lifted its head, those amber eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that felt almost human, pleading, knowing. The embers of her fire had long faded, and the chill deepened as the moon climbed higher. Elara shivered violently, her teeth chattering. Without thinking, driven by the shared misery of the moment, she unwrapped the thin blanket she'd bartered for in a roadside hamlet 2 days back. It was coarse wool, barely enough for one, but she folded it halfway and extended the other half toward the wolf. "Come on, then," she whispered, as if coaxing a stray dog. "Misery loves company, or so they say." To her astonishment, the wolf stirred, dragging its injured body nearer. It settled against her side, the warmth of its fur seeping through the fabric like a hesitant promise. Elara draped the blanket over them both, her arm brushing the rough pelt. The beast's body heat chased away the numbness, and for the first time in nights uncounted, she felt a fragile peace settle over her. its breathing synced with hers, slow and steady, a rhythm that lulled her eyelids heavy. As sleep tugged at her, Elara's mind wandered to the fragments of lore she'd overheard in the village tavern. Whispers of the lupine veil, a curse woven into the blood of the woods by ancient shamans to protect the realm from invaders. Those who showed kindness to the pack were said to earn their vigilance, a bond forged in moonlight and sacrifice. She smiled faintly, dismissing it as fancy. Yet, as dreams claimed her, she felt the wolf's head rest lightly against her shoulder, a guardian in the dark. The night wore on, the wind's howl softening to a murmur. Unseen in the depths of the trees, shadows stirred, forms slipping through the mist like smoke. One by one they gathered, silent sentinels with eyes like embers. Elara slept on, unaware, her hand still clutching the edge of the blanket that now bound her fate to the wild. But dawn was coming, and with it, the first threads of a destiny she could never have woven alone. The wolf beside her stirred, its wound already mending under some unseen grace, and in the distance a chorus of howls rose, not in hunger but in solemn vow. The first light of dawn crept through the whispering woods like a thief, pale and tentative, painting the frost-kissed pines in hues of bruised lavender. Elara stirred, her body heavy with the remnants of sleep. The blanket tangled around her like a lover's reluctant embrace. The warmth beside her had not faded. If anything, it had deepened, a solid presence that anchored her to the earth. She blinked against the chill air, her eyes adjusting to the grey half-light, and froze. The wolf was still there, its massive form curled protectively against her side, but it was no longer alone. Circling the oak in a loose, reverent perimeter stood 19 more. Shadows made flesh, their coats a tapestry of silver, ash, and midnight black. They formed a living wall, eyes glowing like scattered stars, unblinking and solemn. No snarls, no bared teeth, just an eerie stillness, as if they breathed in unison with the awakening forest. The air hummed with their quiet vigilance, a low vibration that resonated in Elara's chest, stirring something ancient and unspoken within her. She sat up slowly, heart pounding like a war drum, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. The original wolf, the one she'd shared her meager warmth with, lifted its head, amber eyes meeting hers without a trace of the desperation from the night before. Its wound, that jagged tear on its hind leg, was now little more than a faint scar, pink and healing as if days had passed in mere hours. A soft whine escaped its throat, not of pain, but of acknowledgement, and it nudged her hand with its muzzle, rough tongue flicking out in a gesture that felt like gratitude. What is this?" Elara whispered, her voice cracking on the words. She reached out tentatively, fingers brushing the wolf's ear, and it leaned into the touch, a rumble of contentment vibrating through its frame. The others watched, unmoving, their breaths steaming in the crisp air. One, a sleek female with fur like rippling smoke, tilted her head, as if listening to secrets carried on the wind. Elara's mind reeled, fragments of village tales crashing together, the lupine veil, the pack that chose its own, binding the lost to the wild in exchange for loyalty, forged in blood and moonlight. She scrambled to her feet, the blanket pooling at her boots and backed against the oak's trunk. The wolves didn't advance, they simply shifted, opening a path through their ranks toward the east, where the sun's edge bled gold over the treetops. Hunger twisted in her gut again, sharper now, but fear overshadowed it. These weren't beasts driven by instinct alone. There was purpose in their gaze, a silent invitation that pulled at her like an undercurrent in a river. Before she could flee or question further, a distant clamor shattered the dawn's fragile peace, hoofbeats thundering through the underbrush, accompanied by the crude shouts of men. Raiders, their voices laced with the slurred triumph of those who'd plundered too long without consequence. Elara's blood ran cold. She knew that timbre all too well, the echo of the night her world burned. They were close, crashing through the woods like a storm of iron and greed, drawn perhaps by the smoke of her failed fire or the faint trail of her passage. The lead wolf rose, ears pricking forward, a deep growl building in its throat that rippled through the pack like a wave. The others echoed it, a chorus that swelled into a howl, piercing and primal, shaking leaves from the branches overhead. Elara pressed herself flatter against the bark, torn between terror and a budding awe. The raiders' voices faltered, curses turning to alarmed yells as the howls multiplied, encircling them from the shadows. She glimpsed them then, 5 horsemen, armored in rusted mail and cloaks stained with the mud of forgotten battles, their mounts snorting steam into the air. The leader, a brute with a scarred face and an axe slung across his saddle, reined in his steed, scanning the gloom. "Wolves!" he spat, drawing his blade with a rasp that cut the morning. "Filthy curs! Flush 'em out, lads! Pelts fetch a good coin in the border towns!" But the pack was already moving, fluid and merciless. The smoke-furred female darted forward first, a blur of fangs and fury, leaping at the nearest horse's flank. The animal reared, screaming, and its rider tumbled into the snow, only to meet the jaws of 2 more wolves that closed in like avenging shades. Blood sprayed, hot and metallic, staining the frost crimson. Elara averted her eyes, but the sounds assaulted her. The wet crunch of bone, the guttural cries of men fighting for breath they no longer had. Her wolf stayed by her side, body tense, ready to spring at her command, or perhaps her defense. She clutched a low branch for support, legs trembling, as the skirmish unfolded in brutal poetry. One raider swung his sword wildly, cleaving air until a massive black wolf, easily twice the size of the others, barreled into him, bearing him down in a tangle of limbs and snarls. The man's scream ended abruptly, swallowed by the forest's indifferent maw. In moments it was over. The horses bolted into the trees, riderless and wild, while the raiders lay broken and still, their blood seeping into the earth like an offering. The pack regrouped, tongues lolling, not a scratch among them. They turned as one toward Elara, their eyes holding no malice, only the quiet satisfaction of guardians fulfilled. The lead wolf approached, dropping a leather pouch at her feet, plucked from the fallen leader's belt, heavy with the clink of stolen coin and the scent of dried herbs. Elara sank to her knees, tears blurring her vision. Gratitude warred with horror in her chest. These creatures had saved her, woven her into their fold with a single act of kindness. But what price would the wild demand? The law whispered of bonds that scarred the soul, of humans who ran with the pack until the line between man and beast blurred forever. As the sun climbed higher, burning away the mist, the wolves fanned out once more, resuming their watch. The lead one lingered, pressing its flank against her, urging her onward with a gentle nudge. East, toward the rising light, where the ruins of Eldrath waited, and perhaps answers to the curse that bound them all. Elara rose, slinging the pouch over her shoulder, the weight of it both burden and boon. She took her first step into the unknown, the pack's shadows her only companions, and felt the first stirrings of a power she hadn't known she possessed, a thread of the old blood awakening in her veins like a long-forgotten song. The woods seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the weave of her fate to unfold. The sun clawed its way higher, turning the whispering woods into a labyrinth of dappled gold and lingering shadow. But the warmth it promised felt like a lie against Elara's skin. She walked with the pack now, her steps tentative, guided by the lead wolf's unyielding presence at her side. Its fur brushed her leg with each stride, a reminder of the night that had reshaped her world, a simple act of shared warmth now echoing in the silent loyalty of 20 beasts. The others fanned out around her, ghosts in the undergrowth, their paws silent on the needle-strewn path. No howls marked their passage, just the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a raven, as if the forest itself conspired to hide them. Ilara's hand rested on the pouch from the raider's belt, its contents a grim talisman, coins etched with the crumbling sigil of Eldrath, a few strips of jerky that she rationed with trembling fingers, and a small vial of dark liquid that sloshed like trapped night. She hadn't dared uncork it yet, fearing what secrets it held. Poison, perhaps, or something worse from the raider's alchemical trades. Hunger had eased slightly from the meat, but a deeper thirst gnawed at her, one that no food could quench. The air tasted thicker here, laced with the scent of damp earth and something feral, like the breath of the wild awakening. As the morning wore on, the woods thinned, giving way to the jagged outskirts of the old kingdom. Ruins emerged like broken teeth from the soil, crumbled stone walls overgrown with ivy, the skeletons of watchtowers leaning drunkenly toward the sky. This was the Vale's edge, the border where Eldrath's glory had shattered under the weight of endless wars and whispered curses. Elara remembered her father's tales, told by the hearthlight, how the shamans of old had woven the lupine veil to guard against invaders from the east, binding the spirits of the forest to wolfkind. Those who crossed with ill intent found their blood the price of passage, but for the chosen, they became part of the weave, their fates entwined with the pack's eternal vigil. She paused at the crest of a hill, the lead wolf halting beside her, its amber eyes scanning the horizon. Below stretched the ravaged plains, a sea of scorched grass and shattered obelisks, remnants of battles long faded into legend. Smoke curled from distant hamlets, harbingers of more raiders or perhaps the kingdom's own desperate militias clashing in the chaos. Ilara's chest tightened. Her village had been one such spark, extinguished too soon. "What now?" she murmured to the wolf, her voice raw from disuse. It tilted its head, a low rumble in its throat like an answer she couldn't decipher, then nudged her forward with insistent warmth. Deeper into the ruins they ventured, the pack weaving through archways choked with thorns. Ilara's boots crunched over mosaic tiles, faded depictions of wolves circling a lunar throne. A chill unrelated to the wind prickled her skin, and she felt it then, a stirring in her blood, like threads pulling taut. Her vision sharpened, colors bleeding into sharper relief. The glint of dew on a spider's web, the subtle twitch of a hidden creature in the brush. The wolf's emotions flickered at the edge of her mind, not words, but impressions, loyalty, a fierce protectiveness that warmed her like the blanket they'd shared. She stumbled, clutching her temple. No, this can't be. But it was. The old blood, the law's truth, seeping into her veins through the bond she'd forged. The pack sensed her unease, closing in tighter, their forms a comforting cage. The smoke-furred female from the dawn skirmish loped ahead, scouting, while the massive black one brought up the rear, its gaze a sentinel's promise. Elara pressed on, driven by a compulsion she couldn't name, until they reached a forgotten temple half swallowed by the earth. Vines draped its columns like funeral shrouds, and at its heart lay a cracked altar, etched with runes that glowed faintly under the midday sun. The air hummed here, thick with the scent of moss and ancient incense, and Elara felt drawn to it, her feet moving of their own accord. She knelt before the altar, the stone cool against her palms, and the visions came unbidden, a flood of images crashing through her mind. Wolves racing under a blood moon, their howls weaving spells that turned enemy armies to stone. A woman much like her, with eyes like storm clouds, sharing bread with a lone pup and awakening the pack's fury against a tyrant king. And deeper, a curse's core. The lupine veil demanded balance. Kindness invited protection, but to wield its power meant sacrifice. A piece of the self surrendered to the wild, blurring the soul's edges until humanity frayed. Tears stung her eyes as the lead wolf approached, laying its head in her lap. Its warmth grounded her, pulling her back from the abyss. "You chose me," she whispered, stroking its ear. "But why? I'm no shaman, no warrior. just a girl who lost everything. The wolf's eyes held hers, and in that gaze she saw her own reflection, not the broken weaver's daughter, but something fiercer, a guardian forged in loss. The pack gathered around the altar, their forms silhouetted against the ruins, a living circle of shadow and strength. Yet peace shattered like fragile ice. A shadow detached from the tree line, a figure cloaked in raven feathers, mounted on a steed as black as void. Not a raider, but something worse. A veil-breaker, one of the curse's hunters, seekers who served the fractured lords of Eldrath. They hunted the old blood's bearers, believing the wolves' power could be tamed and turned to war. The rider's voice cut the air, cold and commanding. The pack reveals its pet. Come quietly, girl, or watch them bleed for your folly. Elara's heart seized, the bond surging like fire in her veins. The wolves bristled, growls rising in a symphony of defiance, but the veil-breaker raised a staff tipped with obsidian, its tip pulsing with stolen moonlight, a relic that could sever the veil's threads. Panic clawed at her. She couldn't lose them, not after the fragile hope they'd given. "Stay back!" she cried, stepping between the pack and the intruder, her voice steadier than she felt. The rider laughed, a sound like cracking bone. "Foolish. The bond marks you now. Witch blood calls to the throne's remnants. Surrender, and perhaps your beasts live as hounds." He spurred forward, the staff igniting with eerie blue flame, aimed at the lead wolf. Time slowed. Elara felt the old blood roar to life, her hands tingling as if roots burrowed into the earth. She thrust her palm out, instinct overriding fear, and a barrier shimmered into being, a veil of silver mist that deflected the staff's bolt, sending it spiraling into the undergrowth, where it scorched the vines to ash. The pack lunged as one, a whirlwind of fangs and fury, but the rider wheeled his mount, vanishing into the mist with a curse that echoed like thunder. Elara collapsed against the altar, gasping, her skin prickling with the aftershock. The wolves surrounded her, nuzzling close, their warmth a balm against the terror. She'd wielded it, the power, raw and unbidden, but in doing so, she'd marked herself deeper, the line between girl and guardian thinning. The lead wolf licked her hand, its eyes promising more trials ahead, and as the sun dipped toward afternoon, Elara rose, resolve hardening like forged steel. The ruins whispered of greater shadows looming, but for the first time, she didn't walk alone. The pack's vigil was her shield, and in their eyes, she glimpsed the woman she might become, one who wove not just cloth, but destiny itself. The afternoon sun hung low, casting the ruins in a ruddy glow that bled into the cracks of the ancient stones like spilled wine. Elara moved through the veil's edge with the pack at her flanks, their shadows merging with hers in a fluid dance that blurred the boundaries of flesh and spirit. The temple's echo lingered in her bones, a thrumming pulse that synced with the wolves' steady breaths, each step pulling her deeper into the web of the old blood. The lead wolf. She had begun to think of it as thorn, for the scar that twisted like a thorn across its muzzle. Pressed close, its warmth a constant anchor against the chill that seeped from the earth. The others wove through the debris, scouts and sentinels, their eyes catching glints of hidden dangers in the fading light. Her hand still tingled from the barrier she'd summoned, a raw energy that hummed beneath her skin like embers waiting to ignite. It terrified her, this awakening, a power that felt borrowed, wild, not entirely her own. In the village, she'd been content with the rhythm of loom and thread, weaving patterns that held families together through harsh winters. Now, those threads seemed trivial against the vast tapestry unfolding before her, one stitched with fangs and moonlight, where every choice could unravel her humanity. "What have I become?" she whispered to Thorn, her fingers burying into its fur as they crested another rise. The wolf's ear flicked, a soft chuff escaping its jaws, as if to say the question itself was the cage she needed to break. The ruins grew denser here, a graveyard of Eldrath's faded empire, toppled statues of long-dead kings, their marble eyes staring blindly at the sky, overgrown with brambles that clawed at Elara's cloak. The air thickened with the scent of decay and wild herbs, and distant thunder rumbled, promising rain that would turn the paths to mud. The pack's formation tightened as they descended into a sunken amphitheatre, its tiered seats cracked and moss-veiled, once a place for proclamations and rituals under the stars. Elara's boots echoed hollowly on the flagstones, the sound swallowed by the encroaching gloom. Visions flickered at the edges of her sight, ghostly echoes of crowds cheering as shamans invoked the veil, wolves bounding across the stage in a ritual of binding. She paused at the center, where a circular pit yawned like an open wound, its depths lost to shadow. The vial from the raider's pouch weighed heavy in her pocket, its dark contents swirling as if alive. Curiosity warred with caution. Perhaps it held a key to the bond, or a poison meant to sever it. Kneeling, she uncorked it, the sharp tang of iron and nightshade rising like a warning. Thorn growled low, circling the pit, while the smoke-furred female, Elara named her in her mind for the grace of her movements, sniffed the air, hackles rising. Before she could pour a drop, the ground trembled. A low groan emanated from the pit, stones shifting as something stirred below. Not earth, but a presence, ancient and resentful. The pack erupted into motion, circling the edge with bared teeth, their howls a barrier against the rising darkness. From the depths clambered the abomination, a twisted fusion of man and beast, its body a mockery of the lupine curse. Fur patchy and matted over decayed flesh, eyes milky with undeath, it dragged itself forward on claws that scraped sparks from the stone. A veil touched gone wrong, perhaps a shaman who delved too deep, or a victim of the curse's backlash, unbound and feral. Elara recoiled, the vial slipping from her grasp to shatter against the rim, its liquid hissing into vapor that mingled with the creature's fetid breath. "Stay away," she commanded, her voice threading with the old blood's authority. But the thing lunged, a guttural snarl bubbling from its throat, jaws unhinging to reveal rows of jagged teeth. Thorn met it head-on, slamming into its side with a force that sent them both tumbling into the pit's shallows. The pack dove in after, a frenzy of snaps and rolls, fur flying in the dim light. Horror rooted Elara in place as she watched. Thorn's form twisting under the abomination's weight, blood matting its silver coat. The bond surged, a torrent of pain and rage flooding her veins, sharper than any blade. She felt every bite, every tear, as if it were her own flesh rending. "No!" The cry tore from her, and she leaped into the fray, hands outstretched. The old blood answered, coiling around her like living smoke, sharpening her senses to a razor's edge. She saw the paths of motion before they happened. Lyra flanking left, the black giant, Onyx, barreling from the right. With a surge, Elara channeled the power, her will weaving through the pack like an invisible leash. The wolves moved as one extension of her, synchronized in a deadly ballet. Thorn wrenched free, clamping jaws around the creature's throat, while Lyra and Onyx tore at its limbs, exposing bone and rot. Elara directed a final pulse, silver mist erupting from her palms to bind the abomination's form, freezing it mid-lunge. It thrashed, a final wail echoing like a shattered vow, before crumbling to dust and shadow, absorbed back into the earth. Panting, Elara dropped to her knees beside Thorn, her hands pressing against the gashes on its flank. Tears blurred her vision, hot and unbidden. "I'm sorry. I should have known." The wolf nuzzled her, its tongue rough against her skin, the wounds already knitting under the veil's grace. Slower this time, as if the curse itself wearied. The pack gathered, licking their own scrapes, their eyes on her with a reverence that bordered on worship. But in that moment, Elara felt the cost. The bond's intimacy was a double-edged blade, sharing not just strength, but suffering. Each wound they bore etched into her soul, a scar that deepened her isolation even as it bound her closer. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then in sheets that turned the amphitheater to a mirror of rippling grey. Elara rose, helping Thorn to its feet, the pack forming ranks around them once more. The confrontation had stirred something irrevocable. She sensed pursuers on the wind, more veil-breakers, drawn by the disturbance, their relics humming with intent to claim the pack's power for Eldrath's warring factions. The kingdom's remnants hungered for control, blind to the Veil's purpose, not conquest but balance. As they pressed onward toward the heart of the ruins where the true source of the curse pulsed, Elara's resolve hardened amid the melancholy. The rain washed the blood away, but not the weight in her chest, a love for these creatures that demanded sacrifice, an impossible tenderness forged in violence. She glanced back at the pit, now a pool reflecting the storm clouds, and whispered a promise to the wild, "I'll protect you, as you have me, whatever it takes." Thorn's amber eyes met hers, a spark of understanding passing between them, and in that shared gaze, hope flickered like lightning, fragile but unyielding. The path ahead twisted into denser shadows, the ruins whispering of trials yet to come. But Elara walked taller now, the weaver's daughter emerging as the pack's heart. The storm raged on, a symphony of renewal and ruin, carrying them toward the eclipse that would test the bonds of blood and blanket alike. Twilight bled into the ruins like ink on wet parchment, the storm's fury ebbing to a persistent drizzle that pattered against the crumbling arches overhead. Elara trudged through the veil's edge, her cloak sodden and heavy, clinging to her like the doubts that shadowed her every step. Thorn limped slightly at her side, the gashes from the amphitheater fight now faint lines beneath its fur, healed by the veil's reluctant mercy. The pack moved as one with her, their forms spectral in the gathering dusk, Elara scouting ahead with silent grace, Onyx guarding the rear like a living fortress. The air hummed with their shared vigilance, a low thrum that resonated in Elara's chest, binding her pulse to theirs in an intimacy that both comforted and confined. The path narrowed into a ravine, walls of jagged stone rising like the ribs of some colossal beast long slain. Moss clung to the surfaces in luminescent patches, casting an eerie green glow that danced with the raindrops. Elara's boots sank into the mud, each pull a reminder of the earth's unyielding grip, mirroring the weight of the old blood coursing through her. It whispered now, not just visions, but urges, a feral hunger to run, to hunt, to claim the night as her own. She clenched her fists, nails biting into palms, fighting the pull. "I'm still me," she muttered to Thorn, who glanced up with amber eyes that held no judgment, only unwavering faith. But in their depths she glimpsed her own fracturing reflection, the weaver's gentle hands now stained with the residue of power, threads of silver mist lingering on her skin like phantom silk. Deeper into the ravine, the ruins gave way to an ancient grove, twisted oaks encircling a still pond that reflected the bruised sky. The water's surface rippled unnaturally, as if breathing, and the pack halted at its edge, ears pricked toward the unseen. Elara felt it too, a tremor in the bond, a ripple of unease that coiled in her gut like smoke. The drizzle thickened to mist, veiling the grove in a shroud that muffled sounds, turning the world ethereal and treacherous. Memories surfaced unbidden, her village's hearth, the warmth of her mother's embrace, the laughter of children chasing fireflies, all ash now, fueling the fire of her resolve. Yet the loss carved hollows in her soul, places where the wild seeped in, filling voids with instincts that weren't hers. A splash shattered the quiet. From the pond rose a figure, not man, not beast, but a spectral guardian of the veil, its form woven from water and moonlight, translucent limbs ending in claws of liquid silver. It was a naiad wolf, a mythical sentinel born of the curse's deeper layers. tasked with testing those who sought the heart of the ruins. Its eyes burned with aquatic fire, locking onto Elara as if peering into her marrow. The pack growled in unison, fur bristling, but they held back, instincts bowing to the creature's ancient authority. This was no enemy to rend. It was a trial, a mirror to the soul. "You bear the mark," the naiad wolf intoned, its voice a cascade of bubbling streams and distant howls echoing in Elara's mind. "Kindness forged the bond, but the veil demands truth. What do you sacrifice for the pack's light?" The mist swirled around it, forming illusory scenes. Elara's village aflame, raiders laughing over graves. Thorn wounded, its life ebbing as she stood frozen, her own form twisting, fur sprouting. Humanity slipping away like sand. Elara's breath hitched, the bond amplifying the visions until pain lanced through her, a phantom agony of choices yet unmade. She stepped forward, rain tracing paths down her face like tears. "I've lost everything already," she said, voice steady, despite the storm within. "My home, my family. If the veil wants more, take it, but I'll not let them fall for my fears." The words hung heavy, a vow etched in the air. The naiad wolf circled her, water trailing in its wake, probing the edges of her aura. Thorn pressed against her leg, a silent pillar, while the pack formed a ring, their eyes reflecting the creature's glow. The trial deepened. The naiad wolf lunged, not with claws, but with tendrils of mist that wrapped around Elara's limbs, pulling her toward the pond. Cold seeped into her bones, visions assaulting her. The impossible love blooming in her heart for these wild kin, a tenderness that could never be spoken, only felt in shared glances and brushes of fur. She saw herself running with them under full moons, free yet forever changed. The line between protector and packmate dissolving. Sacrifice flashed, her voice silenced to communicate in growls, her hands calloused into paws, the warmth of human touch traded for the wild's embrace. Panic surged, but Elara drew on the bond, channeling the pack's strength. Silver threads erupted from her core, weaving through the mist, countering the naiad wolf's grasp. "I choose you," she gasped to Thorn, the words a lifeline. The wolf howled, the pack joining in a crescendo that shook the grove, their voices merging with hers in a symphony of will. The tendrils shattered, the naiad wolf recoiling with a hiss of evaporating water. It regarded her, approval flickering in its fading eyes. The heart proves worthy, but the eclipse nears, and shadows hunger. Lose what chains you, or be lost. With that, it dissolved back into the pond, the waters calming to a mirror once more. Elara collapsed to her knees, drenched and trembling, the mist lifting to reveal stars piercing the clouds. The pack nuzzled close, their warmth chasing the chill, but the trial's echo lingered, a revelation that the true cost was her lingering humanity. The gentle weaver clinging to a world that no longer fit, she stroked Thorn's muzzle, feeling the pulse of their shared blood, a love born of blanket and moonlight, impossible yet unbreakable. As night deepened, the ravine path resumed, leading toward the ruin's core, where the eclipse would crest. Distant howls answered the pack's own, not kin, but warnings of veil breakers closing in, their relics pulsing with stolen power. Elara rose, the old blood singing in her veins, a melody of destiny and pain. The rain eased to a whisper, the grove's beauty a bittersweet balm amid the melancholy. She walked on, the pack's shadows her cloak, each step a sacrifice toward rebirth. In the quiet, hope stirred, not in triumph, but in the quiet strength of bonds forged in the dark, promising light beyond the coming storm. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent witnesses to the unfolding weave, as Elara and her guardians pressed into the heart of shadows, where the eclipse waited to test the limits of flesh and soul. The moon hung bloated and ominous above the heart of the ruins, its light fracturing through the canopy of skeletal elms that clawed at the sky like desperate fingers. Elara's breath came in ragged bursts, the air thick with the scent of wet stone and impending doom, as the ravine spat them out into a vast crater. The Eclipse Hollow, cradle of the lupine veil. Twisted monoliths ringed the depression, their surfaces etched with runes that pulsed faintly. Like veins under pale skin, the drizzle had ceased, leaving the ground slick and treacherous, puddles mirroring the celestial drama unfolding overhead. Thorn stayed glued to her side, its fur damp and warm against her leg, while the pack fanned out in a protective arc, their eyes twin flames in the gloom. Elara's heart thundered, the old blood roiling within her like a storm-tossed sea. The trial in the grove had stripped away illusions, leaving her raw and exposed, the weaver's daughter now a vessel for something vast and untamed. She could feel the pack's emotions bleeding into her own, a fierce loyalty laced with sorrow, the weight of centuries guarding a crumbling realm. "We're close," she whispered to Thorn, her voice barely cutting the hush. The wolf's amber gaze met hers, a silent affirmation, but beneath it lurked a shadow of foreboding, as if it sensed the eclipse's maw, yawning wider. The hollow's center beckoned, a flat dais of obsidian veined with silver, where the veil's source thrummed, an invisible heart beating in rhythm with her own. Legends spoke of this place as the forge of the curse. Shamans binding wolf spirits to the land under a blood moon, creating guardians who demanded equilibrium. Kindness invited alliance, but the eclipse tested the bond's purity, forcing a choice between humanity's chains and the wild's freedom. Elara's skin prickled as she descended the slope, the pack's paws silent on the mud, their forms blending with the night. Visions teased her periphery, flashes of ancient rites. Wolves merging with warriors in ecstatic fury, only to shatter apart in agony. A crackle split the air, blue lightning arcing from the tree line. Veil breakers emerged, 3 riders on steeds foaming at the mouth, their cloaks embroidered with the fractured crown of Eldrath. The leader, a gaunt woman with eyes like chipped flint, brandished a staff crowned by a shard of captured moonlight, its glow siphoning the very essence of the night. Her companions flanked her, one wielding a net woven from enchanted thorns, the other a blade humming with suppressed howls, relics stolen from the veil's fringes, tools to enslave what they could not create. "The witch and her curs," the leader sneered, her voice a whip-crack. "The lords will pay fortunes for your blood. Surrender the pack, and perhaps you live as their kennel keeper." Elara halted, the dais mere steps away, her body coiling with the bond's instinctive rage. The pack bristled, growls rising like a gathering tempest, but she raised a hand, silver mist flickering at her fingertips. "You hunt what you can't understand," she called back, her tone laced with the melancholy of one who'd lost too much to fear. "The veil isn't yours to chain. It's balance, something your kings forgot when they burned the innocent." The words tasted of truth, drawn from the depths of her awakening, but they masked the terror gnawing at her core. These were no raiders. They were harvesters of the old magic, driven by a kingdom's desperate bid for dominance. The leader laughed, spurring her mount forward, the staff igniting in a blaze of stolen light. Bolts lanced toward the pack, searing the air with ozone and the cries of trapped spirits. Lyra dodged with liquid grace, countering with a leap that tore at the horse's flank, but the net-wielder flung his weapon, ensnaring Onyx in thorns that drew blood and muffled his roar. Thorn lunged protectively, jaws snapping at the encroaching darkness, while Elara channeled the old blood, weaving a barrier that shattered 2 bolts but left her knees buckling from the strain. Pain lanced through her, an echo of Onyx's wounds, the bond turning agony into shared fire. The skirmish erupted into chaos, wolves darting through the shadows like vengeful wraiths, their fangs finding flesh amid the riders' curses. Elara fought her way to the dais, mud sucking at her boots, the eclipse's shadow creeping across the moon like a predator's bite. The leader dismounted, staff raised high, chanting words that twisted the air, a ritual to sever the veil's threads, unraveling the pack's unity. Thorn barreled into one rider, bearing him down in a spray of blood, but the blade wielder slashed at its side, reopening old scars. Elara felt it as her own, a ripping in her chest that blurred her vision with red. "No more," she gasped, reaching the dais. The obsidian warmed under her palms, runes igniting as the old blood surged unchecked. She poured her will into it, visions flooding her. The blanket's warmth, the dawn's revelation, the impossible love binding her to these souls. Not as master, but kin. The pack's howls wove into her cry, a symphony that clashed with the leader's chant. Silver light erupted from the dais, coiling around the veil breakers like living vines, binding their relics and draining their stolen power back into the earth. The leader staggered, eyes widening in fury and fear. "You fool! The eclipse will consume you all. Untamed, you'll become the monsters we hunt." But Elara held firm, the light piercing her too, burning away the last veils of her old self. Fur prickled along her arms, senses sharpening to the moon's cold kiss, a partial shift that clawed at her humanity. She lost something then, not flesh, but the illusion of separation, the gentle isolation of her former life dissolving into the pack's collective soul. Thorn broke free, joining her at the dais, its wound mending in the glow as their eyes locked. A moment of profound tenderness amid the violence, a silent vow of shared destiny. The veil-breakers fell, their forms crumpling as the light faded, relics shattering like brittle bones. The pack regrouped, licking wounds, their gazes on Elara with deepened reverence. The eclipse deepened overhead, the moon a sliver of crimson, pulling at the hollow's core. Exhaustion crashed over her, mingled with a fierce joy, the pain purposeful, forging her anew. She stroked Thorn's flank, feeling the rhythm of their intertwined hearts, a love that transcended words, born of sacrifice and moonlight. But the night wasn't done. Distant thunder rolled. Not storm, but the approach of greater shadows. Eldrath's full hunt drawn by the disturbance. The eclipse's peak loomed, promising transformation or oblivion. Elara stood taller, the weaver's threads now woven into the wild's eternal pattern. Her solitude traded for a destiny etched in blood and hope. The pack closed ranks, ready for the storm, as the first stars of the darkened sky witnessed their unyielding vigil. The eclipse swallowed the moon whole, plunging the eclipse hollow into an abyss where shadows thickened like tar, clinging to the monoliths and seeping into every crevice of the ruined earth. Elara stood at the dais's edge, her body a conduit for the veil's fury, silver light still flickering from her fingertips like dying embers. The air pulsed with the aftermath of the veil-breaker's fall, their broken forms scattered like discarded puppets, relics reduced to smouldering husks that hissed against the slick stone. Thorn pressed against her, its breath ragged, the fresh slash on its side, weeping dark blood that mirrored the crimson sliver of moon overhead. The pack encircled them, 19 forms etched in the gloom, their eyes the only points of warmth in the encroaching void. Loyal sentinels, weary but unbowed. Elara's chest heaved, the old blood thrumming through her veins like a war drum, amplifying the pack's exhaustion into her own. She felt their pains as echoes, Lyra's thorn-pricked paw, Onyx's laboured gait from the net's barbs, the collective ache of wounds mended too many times under the curse's strained grace. The bond, once a gentle warmth like the shared blanket, now clawed at her insides, demanding more. Her humanity, her solitude, the fragile remnants of the girl who'd woven dreams into cloth. "Hold on," she murmured to Thorn, her hand buried in its fur, fingers trembling as the eclipse's peak crested. The world held its breath, the hollow's runes blazing to life in a corona of ethereal fire, pulling at her like invisible tides. Distant thunder swelled, not from clouds but from the earth itself, the full hunt of Eldrath awakening. Hoofbeats echoed from the ravine's mouth, a legion of armored riders cresting the rim, their torches flaring like accusatory stars. Banners whipped in the wind, bearing the fractured crown, and at their fore rode a warlord in blackened plate, his helm crested with wolf fangs, a scepter gripped in gauntleted fist. "The Witch Queen rises!" he bellowed, voice booming over the hollow like a death knell. "Seize the pack! Their blood will forge our new dawn!" Arrows whistled, embedding in the mud around the dais, while hounds, twisted by alchemical chains, bayed in feral mimicry of the wolves. The pack surged forward without hesitation, a tide of fangs and fury crashing against the invaders. Elara darted through the legs of horses, hamstringing mounts that screamed and toppled their riders into the fray. Onyx charged the warlord's vanguard, his massive frame barreling through shields like parchment, blood spraying in arcs that caught the eclipse's red glow. Thorn stayed with Elara, growling low as she channeled the dais's power, silver barriers blooming to deflect the onslaught. But the numbers overwhelmed. Wolves fell back, nipped and bleeding, their howls turning plaintive as the bond funneled their despair into her heart. She staggered, an arrow grazing her shoulder, hot pain blooming like a lover's bite, shared, intimate, tearing at the threads of herself. The warlord broke through, his steed rearing as he leveled the scepter, a relic forged from veil-torn hearts, pulsing with the stolen essence of bound beasts. "Your kindness was your undoing, girl," he snarled, the weapon igniting in a vortex of shadow that latched onto the pack, siphoning their strength. Thorn convulsed, collapsing at Elara's feet, its amber eyes dimming as the bond screamed through her, a symphony of agony that ripped her vision white. She saw it all, the blanket's fragile peace, the dawn's vow, the impossible love that had woven her soul to theirs. To save them, she had to lose, the last anchor of her human isolation, the weaver's quiet world that kept the wild at bay. With a cry that shattered the night, Elara thrust both hands into the dais, the obsidian cracking under her grip. The old blood erupted, no longer borrowed but claimed, flooding the hollow in a maelstrom of moonlight and mist. It coursed through the pack, mending wounds in bursts of silver, but the cost carved deep. Her form shuddered, fur rippling across her skin in waves, senses exploding into the raw clarity of the hunt. Nails lengthened to claws, her howl joining theirs, a primal keen that echoed the eclipse's zenith. The warlord's scepter shattered in his grasp, shadows recoiling as the veil reaffirmed its balance, turning his legion's charge into rout. Horses bolted, men fled into the dark, their screams swallowed by the wolves' triumphant chorus. Elara collapsed beside Thorn, the transformation ebbing as the eclipse fractured, moon's light spilling back like blood from a healed wound. Her body ached, human once more, but forever marked. Subtle shifts lingering, eyes sharper, a feral grace in her step. The pack's thoughts whispering at her mind's edge. She'd lost the solitude that had defined her, the gentle detachment of one who mended rather than rent. In its place bloomed a deeper belonging, painful and profound, a love that demanded her whole. Thorn stirred, licking her cheek with a rough tongue, its eyes bright with renewed fire. The pack gathered, nuzzling close, their warmth a circle unbroken. Dawn crept over the hollow's rim, tentative gold piercing the mist, painting the monoliths in hues of rebirth. Elara rose, supporting Thorn as they climbed from the crater, the pack trailing in solemn vigil. No words passed. A silent look between her and the wolf said enough. A gesture of scarred paws entwined with human hands, promising trials ahead, but no longer alone. The ruins whispered farewell, the veil's heart quieting to a steady pulse, as mother and guardian stepped into the light. In the distance, new howls rose, not of loss, but of a pack whole, weaving destiny from the threads of sacrifice and unbreakable bond. The kingdom's shadows lingered, but so did hope, fragile as first light, fierce as the wild's embrace.